Hello and welcome to Stellar Strategy Gaming. Today we will be talking about two of D&D's most interesting races added to Volo's Guide. The Aasimar, the Grand Winged Species, and the Triton, the Defenders of the Deep.
Yes, the Aasimar are plane-touched beings, meaning they have influence from something from the outer planes. Specifically, they have celestial ancestry, so the child of an angel, more or less. As an Aasimar, your charisma increases by 2. You can live to be up to 160 years old, and your base walking speed is the usual. You get dark vision out to 60 feet. Alignment usually are good, but they can be anything because alignment means nothing anymore. You have resistance to necrotic and radiant damage. And as an action, you can touch a creature and it regains a number of hit points equal to your level once between long rests. You know the Lightbearer cantrip, speak, read, and write, common, and celestial. So right off the bat, we've got a pretty strong build here. Those resistances are nice. Dark vision's always handy. Some nice sub-abilities. And with the charisma buff, obviously, Paladin, Warlock, Bard, or the one we always forget, Sorcerer. Now there's a couple of sub-races of Aasimar. You can be a Protector Aasimar. That buffs your Wisdom score by 1. And at 3rd level, you get the ability to make some wings sprout from your back that don't give you a flying speed of 30 feet. And once on each of your turns, you can deal radiant damage to one target when you deal damage with an attack or spell. Radiant damage equals your level. Once you use the trait, you can't use it again before you finish a long rest. Next up, you've got the Scourge Aasimar, which gets a buff to the Constitution, so nice one for a Paladin in particular, but could work for anything really. Who doesn't love Constitution? 3rd level, you use your action to release Divine Energy. It causes light to radiate from you, lasts for 1 minute, and sheds bright light for a 10-foot radius and dim light for an additional 10 feet. So if you're in an Underdark campaign, and you'd like for everything in the whole entire Underdark to know exactly where you and your party are, this is the ability for you. You and each creature within 10 feet of you takes radiant damage equal to half your level, rounded up. In addition, once on each of your turns, you can deal extra radiant damage to one target when you deal damage to it with an attack or spell equal to your level. And as usual, once recharges on a long rest. I should point out, even though you are theoretically dealing equal damage to yourself and whatever's around you, you have resistance to radiant, so you are getting the better end of that deal. Then the last subclass of them is the Fallen Aasimar, who are touched by the dark powers in some way. Strength increases by 1, so once again, that's nifty for a Paladin or maybe a Valor Bard. 3rd level, you unleash your energy, causes your eyes to turn into a pool of darkness, and 2 skeletal, ghostly, flightless wings sprout from your back. Other creatures within 10 feet of you can see you must each succeed on a charisma saving throw, or become frightened of you until the end of your next turn. Lasts for 1 minute, or you can end it as a bonus action. And once on each of your turns, you can deal extra necrotic damage to one target when you deal damage with an attack or spell, again equal to your level, and again recharges on a long rest. So some pretty interesting and powerful subvariants on these guys.
Yes, and I also find that they are really great from a lore perspective and a roleplay perspective, especially the Fallen Aasimar. In my opinion, the Fallen Aasimar has the most potential for roleplay, especially as you don't necessarily have to start out as one to become one. You could start out as another kind of Aasimar, and then with your DM's permission, perhaps a certain series of events, like you gaining a rogue edgy backstory, could cause you to transform into one of these.
So since you could do it where you start out as a regular Aasimar, and since the abilities don't really take effect until level 3, you, if you wanted to, could have it be something where you start out as a noble good guy type Aasimar, and then as you're approaching level 3, you make some kind of a deal, literally a deal with the devil or a deal with whatever, and you spec into Warlock.
Similarly, if you're character is unfortunate enough to end up in the negative energy plane for whatever reason, and for some reason your DM doesn't instantly kill you, first off, they're DMing wrong. But second, the Azamar actually do have a pretty good excuse for that, because being effectively manifestations of planar energy, one could argue that an Azamar exposed to the negative energy plane would literally become a manifestation of that, and thereby become a fallen Azamar. It could be very interesting stuff. There's a lot of ways to go with it. And the other main roleplay possibility I want to talk about is the Guardian ability. It's not an ability in the sense of, oh, you gain an extra d20 or whatever it is, like some classes get for advantage. Instead, it's more for the DM and for roleplay abilities. It is a angel, usually, that appears to you in dreams. And what it does is it sort of guides your character throughout the campaign. It means that your DM can basically say, okay, you're doing this wrong if you've been stuck on that same door puzzle for 3 sessions in a row. And it also means that if your character is a fallen Azamar, for example, but they're trying to redeem themselves, and maybe the first sign of this as they become a paladin is that their guardian returns to them, or something like that. Just throwing out possibilities. The point stands. There's just so many ways you can go with this. It's very interesting stuff.
Yes, there's many options where you could do that with how you use the Guardian, but I'm going to say if you don't use it to spec into Warlock and then become Kronk from Emperor's New Groove with the Shoulder, Angel, and Devil, you're doing it wrong. I actually had the chance to play a Fallen Azamar, and it was a really fun character. The setup for that one was not really what's in the book, but the DM allowed it. It was a character with both angelic and demonic heritage. And so the Fallen Azamar was a logical choice because he was very clearly touched by the dark powers, and that manifestation made a lot of sense. And it was a way to play a very secretive kind of a character, and actually played him as a ranger, Horizon Walker ranger, the one who is sort of guarding against portals to the other realms, which was a very logical choice for that kind of character. He's very much in tune with the planes and would very much want to protect whatever plane he's on from the outer planes or from extraplanar threats. Should point out here, these characters are very much like tieflings in the sense that they are influenced from another plane, and this is reflected in both the variations of them and in their abilities. It is a very nice complement to the tieflings. If you want to be descended from a devil, you can be descended from a devil. If you want to be descended from an angel, you can be descended from an angel. They're really powerful and a lot of fun to play.
Yes, and moving on to Tritons, I tend to classify these as lovable but forgettable, because the Tritons, again, in my opinion, are the most forgettable species in D&D at the moment, and I am aware that gnomes are in fact a thing, though most people aren't because of how forgettable they are. The Triton I have never played, and I have played D&D for years now, 3 or 4 years to be precise. And with the Tritons, not only have I never played them, I have never seen any of my groups have a Triton in their game at all, which is saying something, because that's not just one player's experience, that's about a dozen different players over the years. So really, it says something that I just can't really get behind them. And I think part of the problem is that their abilities are really only useful in certain situations. It's the same problem that Warlock of the Depths has for me, which is that water-based abilities basically only go in the Saltmarsh campaign module. Outside of that, you rarely encounter situations where water is a big deal, and so wasting one of your species' whole magical abilities on water breathing is nearly useless, especially if you think about it. If your Triton has water breathing and none of the rest of the party has water breathing, it's actually kind of worse because the DM is going to build to the rest of the party in that case. You can't really expect the DM to sort of sideline the entire campaign to create one specific module just for your character, unless you've perhaps worked it out so that there's some way for the rest of the party to become involved. And so just overall, I think that maybe these guys should be diversified, maybe with a subclass or something.
So yes, the Tritons actually do have a pretty good ability block, but since most campaigns are not aquatic campaigns, they're just not what comes to mind for most people. Now, you get increases to your strength, constitution, and charisma score each by 1 point, which is basically the book telling you you can become paladin, or you can possibly become a Pact of the Blade warlock. And that's about what this is meant to be. You can certainly do other things. You could do, bard, sorcerer, or whatever. Strength, constitution, and charisma buff would actually be pretty good for something like a valor bard or a College of Blades bard. And the size and speed are standard, although you do get a swimming speed of 30 feet. You can breathe air and water. And then you do have some abilities. You can talk to sea creatures. They can understand the meaning of your words, though you have no special ability to understand them in return.
That seems super useful in every situation, Aquaman.
Yeah, I mean, you can talk to fish, but they can't talk back, so it's one of those things like, I don't know how that works. I mean, you tell the fish, blink once if yes, blink twice if no.
And then you pray that they're not a goldfish so they can actually remember that.
And, 3rd level you get the Gust of Wind spell. At 5th level you get Wall of Water, which is actually a pretty good spell. You have resistance to cold damage, which is kind of cool. And you can speak, read, and write Common and Primordial, which nobody cares about.
I've literally never had a character speak Primordial.
So, yeah, it's a good stat block. I wish the lore on them was a little bit deeper. The way they're described in the book actually sounds pretty interesting. They spend their whole lives protecting the prime material from threats from aquatic planes of the abyss, and also from other extraplanar threats that tend to emerge through planar portals deep in the ocean where land dwellers would not see them, or from threats like that emerge from the deep itself, like Sahagwin and Kraken and things like that. And land dwellers aren't really aware that all of this is going on because it's so far out of sight. So Tritons, when they do interact with the other races, they have this expectation that everybody's going to know about their heroics, and nobody has any idea what they're talking about. So even though they tend to be good aligned, they come across as just extremely, extremely arrogant, which is, again, part of what makes me think Paladin. Like, this race was just meant to be Paladins.
Yes, and I feel there is a pretty good way to fix this, and the way how I'm going to explain this is going to violate one of the greatest rules as established by Ghostbusters, which is don't cross the streams, but I'm going to reference Magic the Gathering here and cross the fandoms. In Magic the Gathering, in the block of Zendikar, merfolk are a huge player in the species dynamic and the world at large. In fact, not to get too much into it, but without merfolk, the resistance would have fallen apart long ago in Zendikar. And that is partially because many of the merfolk in Zendikar have evolved to be primarily land-based due to the strange nature of the world, where water isn't necessarily reliably in the ocean. And something similar could be done with Tritons for a subclass. Have a subspecies of them where maybe they live in a lake or something, and so they get less water-based abilities, but in exchange they get certain very unique abilities. I like the resistance to cold. I think they should sort of follow up with that. Another one that I could see is actually a duality type vibe, where maybe they have a resistance to heat as well, or fire damage, as that fits the theme of them adapting to land, but perhaps maybe they have to sacrifice something like their water breathing, but in sort of a Killer Croc kind of way, where they can still breathe, they can still hold the breath for an extended period of time. Without these subclasses, they're one note, and they're the only species that is this one note. Even gnomes have subclasses, and tieflings and just nearly, hell, even humans have a variant. Whereas the Tritons, they don't have anything. They only have one page of lore, basically, and on top of that, they don't have subclasses. So you can't do nearly as much. And if you make a Triton character, it's likely that you won't play them as a Triton because you just don't have enough information on their society to play them correctly. If you're playing a Drow, there's a very specific way how you play a loyal drow or a disloyal drow, you know? With a Triton, you just kind of shrug and look to whatever mermaid-based TV show you have around at the time. It's not very creative, I find, and it stifles creativity just how much Wizards has done this species wrong by not fleshing them out more.
To your point, one thing that would be really interesting to play if you wanted to sort of go against type would be if you played a Triton who was river-based. Maybe there's like a colony of riverine Tritons who are more mercantile, and they're maybe a little bit looser in their morals. Maybe get a different stat buff, maybe a little bit more charisma and less of something else because they're based on being traders. That could be a lot of fun and interesting, and that could be a situation where it would be interesting to have more than one Triton in the party. One thing that can come up that's a lot of fun is if you have two different kinds of a thing in a party. So you get two different kinds of elves who maybe don't necessarily like each other or don't trust each other. If you had some Triton variants, you could pull something like that off. And that's actually the one complaint we had in our video about half-orcs and half-elves, which you should definitely go and watch, is that there wasn't enough variation among them. There weren't enough subtypes for the number of these kinds of people there would be. And I definitely feel like Mara is on to something with the Tritons. But what do you think, Internet? Have you played a really fun and interesting Triton character, or are we all wrong about this? We want to know your thoughts on it, so please do leave a comment about that. If you've made it this far, please like and subscribe for more content. Our next video is going to be how to DM for a party of noobs.